We're about fanning the flames of social movements in the United States towards the effective construction of a just transition. And we work with our key allies in grassroots organizations rooted in working class communities and communities of color in the Bay Area and other urban centers to make that just transition a reality. So I think we all agree here that change is the new status quo. Said yet another way, there is no set status quo. Oh, thank you. Well, I should figure this one out so that I can. Yes. Presenter tools, I forgot. I got it. I can do it. Thank you. Yes, the presenter tools. Yes, I think I got it. We're good. Thank you. Important details. Yes, so I was saying, change is the new status quo. So the question for us becomes, what will change look like? Will it be an intentional transition or collapse? And when I say intentional transition, I'm speaking about this just transition. Transition is inevitable. Justice is not. I think that's the key political question that needs to be central to the conversation we are having today. One way to think about it, when we think about changes, whether it's climate change, whether it's market crashes, if disruptions are the new normal, we find it useful to classify the instability into two categories: shocks and slides. Shocks being acute moments of disruption. We're having more and more of them. The Fukushima disaster, the BP oil spill in the Gulf, Katrina, 9/11. And we have slides, slower incremental changes, and while they are not acute, they can also be catastrophic. Sea level rise, the collapse of industrial agriculture in California. It's been happening for a while. It continues on. So our challenge is to harness the shocks and direct the slides towards positive societal aha moments. That is one of our key tasks. But we will only be able to do this if we anticipate these and if we prepare for them. If we look back at recent ones, whether it's 9/11 or whether it's Katrina, there were amazingly beautiful, spontaneous expressions of individual folks showing cooperative behavior, taking care of each other. But I think one can argue effectively that as a social force, as folks who believe in a better world, we weren't prepared to harness these moments for positive social change. So for example, 9/11 gave us the war on terror. It gave us curtailment of our civil liberties. Katrina led to the Disneyfication of New Orleans, became a playground for wealthy folks, and we still have tens of thousands of folks, if not hundreds of thousands of folks, who call New Orleans their home, and they are no longer home. So our challenge then is to really prepare our thinking and prepare our movement strategy to ensure that we harness these moments into aha moments and make the other worlds that we believe are possible through these shifting conditions. Central to this notion is the notion of resistance. I thank Mary for her incredibly important words this morning and for reading the quote from Frederick Douglass, because they are incredibly true. We will not achieve resilience if we don't have the leverage to achieve it. This is contested terrain. When I described what happened after 9/11 or after Katrina, it happened because profiteers and polluters are studying this terrain too. And they are preparing themselves to act when these shocks and slides happen. It is contested terrain. There are other, yes. So if we have no power to contest, we won't have the capacity to create and build resilience. And central then to this equation is the fact that impacted communities at the front lines of the damage already being caused by our global industrial economy, these frontline communities must be at the center of the leadership in defining the future of our communities. There's an image on the left. It may be a little hard to read, but it's folks representing Via Campesina, the most important, the largest social movement that crosses all continents, representing people in many, many dozen countries. It is folks, peasants, small farm workers. They're at an international climate change, UN climate conference, and their slogan says global warming, global poverty, agrarian reform and sustainable agriculture now. We take deep inspiration in what they are calling for. And one of the things they've been calling for from US allies like ourselves is for the desperate creation of a land reform movement in the United States. I would argue that building that land reform movement is a central part of us being able to create resilience, regain control of home here, and be able to be in deep alliance with folks in the global south who are leading this important fight. Why do I say this? Ecology, if we think about the root of the word, eco means home, logic means knowledge of home. Economy is the management of home. In order to no longer have an economy that's imposed from above, but to have many economies seeded from below, we need to reclaim that management of home. And we start doing that by regaining control of the land we live on. That's how we start building a reflective, responsive relationship to place. The way we and many of our allies have been thinking about this is through this concept of resilience-based organizing. What do I mean by this? It's people working together to directly meet their needs through shared work with a deep ecological lens and building power in the process. What does this look like on the ground? It looks like taking idle land and starting to grow food for our communities, taking control of our own watersheds to protect their regenerative capacity and meet our basic human rights to water. It's taking control of our own energy sets. There was an interesting expression, well, actually, I want to storytell, but I'm conscious of time, I won't storytell. I'll give you a specific example of how we're engaged in this work. In the Bay Area, we are part of a resiliency-based organizing learning circle. We work with many grassroots organizations who are experimenting with what this looks like on the ground, and a couple of those examples. One is an organization in Richmond called Urban Tilth, and they already have access to 20 acres of land. They're growing food on idle lots, public land, idle private land. Their goal is to grow 5% of the food that feeds Richmond, and they're grafting ornamental plum trees to make them create actual food. They're tearing down fences. And one of the central things that a 22-year-old leader of Urban Tilth said just recently that I found incredibly inspiring. He said, his name is Jesse Alberto, and he's been working with Urban Tilth since he was 16. He said, what we're trying to do is radically change public space by growing and offering free food. They're tearing down fences in our hoods and in our minds. They're building a transformative narrative, which we so desperately need in this country. They're moving the conversation around land from simply public and private land to the people's land and defining if it's the right thing to do, we have every right to do it. And when people say, you know, you should be building fences around these greenways where you're growing food, people are going to damage the crops you're growing, they say that defeats the point. That defeats the point. What we're trying to do is actually harvest a new conception of what a neighborhood is like. If there's food growing and there's somebody hungry, by all means, they should come in and take that food. And we just need to have a little sign that says, don't pull out the roots, just take the fruit. And that's what they're doing, and they're transforming Richmond in the process. And they're transforming the conversation about who Richmond belongs to and who should manage the land that is Richmond. This is a child. Many of you know the story of the South Central Farm in LA. It's a child farm. If you don't know the story, it's a beautiful, poignant story that relates to this directly. But we have to dream up a world where many worlds fit. And we have to move from what is considered politically feasible and really engage with what is materially and culturally necessary. That is one of the challenges at hand. And I would say, you know, a question was posed is what would make ecological stewardship more accessible, more ubiquitous to a young person in Vietnam or Brazil versus Angry Birds? And I would say a robust land reform movement that returned that young person's ancestral right to determine his or her people's destiny on his or her ancestral land. That's what's going to make it happen. It's not a technical problem. It's not a technological problem. It's a governance problem. It's a governance and a cultural problem. And we have to create the muscle of social movements fighting very hard, marrying resistance and resilience to make this kind of shift, not only in mindset, but an actual management of land possible. So you can see we like alliteration at Movement Generation. I mentioned resistance, I mentioned resilience. Now I'm going to talk about restoration. And in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on the image on the bottom right hand. So in order to restore the web of life, we need to return to the web of life what has been forced into the chain of the market in order to allow for our planetary systems to heal. The courageous women down here are part of La Colectiva. It's a domestic workers cooperative in San Francisco. It's a worker-owned, living-wage house cleaning business. Their tagline is, organized labor for an organized home. One of the steps in the transition is to restore human labor back into the web of life and out of the chain of the market. Worker ownership, worker organizing, and making invisible work visible. It's no surprise women of color in this country often hold these roles in poor communities. So the transition from a get mine to a share our society requires a full valuing of these forms of labor. So to connect it directly to this question of resilience in an ecological context, the only way to exploit ecosystems at the scale we are doing so now, the only way to do it, the only way to destroy our planetary systems the way we're doing it right now, is to first concentrate and exploit human labor. To pretend that we can have an ecologically resilient world without taking on the question of social injustice is just that, to pretend, to live in illusion. If we want to abolish the damaging hierarchy we humans have instituted on the natural world, if we want to reintegrate our ways into the cycle of life, rather than pretend we are separate or above nature, then we also have to end hierarchy in our social systems. One won't come without the other. Ecological imbalance and social imbalance are born out of the same damaging mindset of hierarchy, of power over, and hierarchy, oppression, and power and control are all central tenets of capitalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. To be true ecologists means committing ourselves to end all systems that promote and enforce hierarchy and oppression. These are movement fundamentals that I would argue we need to take to heart and we need to put into practice in all of the work that we do from here on forth. So to finish, I want to just create some visuals of what does this look like then on the ground. And I think it speaks to a lot of the amazing work that many of you are doing in this room already. What do we need to do? And what are we already doing? We need to foster social movements that are building the power and the relationships to win this just transition. And this just transition is composed of democratizing, decentralizing, diversifying, and dampering down, by that meaning consuming less. We need to create social structures, social systems that are truly democratic, that are truly decentralized, and that diversify the types of solutions. There are no magic bullets, going back to this question of technical and technological. We have the answers at our disposal, and they're going to look differently in different bioregions. But some of the memes that we like to use is cities that run on the sun. And by that we mean taking full advantage of what our energy sheds offer in our respective bioregions to have small-scale, closed-loop, locally produced, community-controlled, renewable energy. So creating a huge solar farm in the middle of the Mojave Desert that is owned by British Petroleum or Chevron is not going to be the answer. Implementing eminent domain on the aerial space of all commercial development in our cities and saying to big box stores, we, the community, own the space over your retail, and we're going to install solar that's run by the community, that's community choice aggregated, that has nothing to do with Pacific Gas and Electric. That is a real step towards local energy independence. Cities that know how to grow. Short chain and known chain exchange food systems that are culturally appropriate. The best example of this is what has been constructed and is now contested terrain in the beautiful metropolis of Detroit. Zero. Okay, time is up. You all know the story of Detroit, so I'll just show the slides and move on. Cities that go with the flow, deindustrialize our water supply. Cities that move in mass. Cities that work together. community economics. Cities that know where they are. Cities in and of themselves are not a place. They are part of a bioregion. And finally, the last one, city where people set roots. I mentioned the need for land reform. We need to take housing out of the market and into the commons. Because what happens? If you green a block, you gentrify that block. And when you gentrify that block, properties start going up. And when prices start going up, speculators move in. And then the folks who've been living there all along are forced out. And where are they forced out to? There, as we know from Annie Leonard, there is no way. It just means farther away and less access to the human basic needs you have. So finally, cities we all call home, where everyone lives well and nobody lives better. Thank you very much.